Hi, my name is Paul Brown. I'm a bass guitar player and I teach a bass class in Arlington Adult Education.
Hi, I'm Risa Browder. I'm a violinist and violist, and I teach orchestra at H.B. Woodlawn Secondary Program in Arlington.
Hi, I'm Thomas Hartman. I conduct the Arlington Youth Symphony and teach orchestras at Yorktown High School and Swanson Middle School in Arlington, Virginia. Please join us in conversation.
Well, I've been playing music almost as long as I can remember. I remember starting the violin when the Suzuki method first came to this country when I was about 3. And I just kept playing over the years, and I started out not going to music school when I went to college, but decided right away that music had to be the central part of my life. So I transferred to conservatory, and it's just, music is just always with me, and at a certain point I really wanted to share that with students, so I teach privately, and then I started directing orchestras at H.B. Woodlawn.
I've always been curious about whether before you went to HB you had worked with youth orchestras and done that sort of teaching before. Or whether
No, I went in totally cold. I wasn't expecting to teach in a school, so I most of my professional life I've been teaching privately and playing concerts and recording and things like that. But my husband went to H.B. Woodlawn, and when my older son was there and the orchestra teacher said he was leaving to go back to graduate school, and he said, "Risa, would you apply for the job here?" And I thought, oh, I don't think so. I have no training. But it's a place where they're very trusting of people, and they knew me. They knew I was a professional musician, and so they took a risk and hired me, and then I did the alternate route to certification. So, but I was very, very scared the first few days.
How long ago was that?
That was 8 years ago.
And how comfortable are you now?
I'm very comfortable. Yeah, and I've gotten a lot of training along the way too, both from my students and from some professional training
development.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, so. I have a sort of similar beginning in that I can definitely remember how old I was. I'm sure I was much older than you when I first went home from school and said they're giving violin lessons and I want them. I was in Buffalo, New York, a long, long time ago. And I remember carrying my little violin off to work, to school every day. And I remember that my teacher was Herr Koch. In Buffalo in those days, all music teachers were Herr somebody. It was a very dramatic place. And I remember that my lessons cost 35 cents each.
Wow.
So
That's a good deal.
That was a long time ago. But I actually attended the Arlington Public Schools. I think you know that, Risa. We came down from Buffalo when I was about 10, and I went to a year of elementary school here. And then I was at Stratford Junior High, which happens to have been
my building.
The building which is now H.B. Woodlawn.
Yeah.
And then attended Washington Lee, went to college locally at American U, where I thought I was going to be a music major, but I kind of did the opposite. I'd already been a professional musician for quite a while, and they told me to go study something else because you're going to be bored, so I did. And then after that I went to England and spent a long time working there, both as a performer and educator. And when I came back, I decided I'd come and try to make a contribution to the school system I started my music in, really, because I got more serious about music here. And so I came to Arlington. So Paul, how did you get into all this?
Well, let's see. I guess in grammar school, etc., I picked up a few different instruments. I remember I started with the French horn. I think my parents asked me, well, what instrument do you want to play? I said, what would be the biggest, thing to cause the most disruption in the house? And the French horn's where I ended up. That lasted for a couple of years, I guess, and I went on to up the confusion level in the house with the drum set, and that seemed to be a good move for a while. I got a job in high school this was up in New England, in our town's music store, and it was a private mom and pop music store, nothing like the giant guitar centers are these days, and it's there where I kind of first held my first electric bass, and as the person who would sort of clean the instruments and get them, keep them in tune for when customers wanted to play them, I kept gravitating to the bass. And so eventually I bought one out of my, took a few paychecks to cover that in high school, but I bought one, and I've been playing it since then. So that was the early 80s. Been in a number of different bands. It seems that you all probably have some level of education, formal music education that I don't necessarily have. I've taken a bunch of different lessons, a year here and there, some things at college, some things from different private instructors, and it's been sort of a peace parting for myself. I'm actually one of the few people I know who really just enjoy opening a theory book and reading it. It is fun for me to kind of piece these things together.
Me too.
Thank you. Oh, have you written any, maybe?
It's interesting. You seem to be one of those rare bass guitarists who came to the bass as the bass rather than gravitating to it from the guitar itself.
That makes sense to me. I know a bunch of people who kind of started as guitarists, and then they say, well, my band needed a bass player, so...
And suddenly I was a bass player.
Right, and sometimes it's spoken of as sort of I don't know if it's a demotion, but it's maybe a second choice to what they'd rather do.
Yes.
Not the case for me. I think the bass has just a very important role in the type of music that I like.
Absolutely. So. It's interesting. That's roughly what happened to me. I was at Berklee School of Music in Boston as a trumpet player and guitar player. And a friend of mine was broke and had an electric bass that he wanted to get rid of. It was a Fender Jazzmaster. This was 1959.
That's probably a very valuable bass at this point.
I suppose it is for whoever still owns it.
Yeah.
But I very stupidly sold it for $100 and thought I was a financial genius. But I didn't play the bass. But this guy was selling it, and I was, I had a little money in my pocket, so I bought it and stuck it in the corner of my room. And the next day, I lived in a house with a lot of other Berklee music students. Next day, the phone rings, and somebody said, "Can we talk to the guy who plays the bass?" And it was kind of power of elimination. I was the guy that played the bass. I was the only guy who owned a bass. It must be me. So I answered this phone call, and that evening I was on a gig at a Boston bar.
How'd that work out?
30 on, 30 off with another band for 8 hours from middle of the afternoon until 2 o'clock. And, well, I lived to tell the tale.
Okay.
I wound up going on the road with a rock band out of Memphis playing the bass.
Oh,
so.
Exciting. Yeah, I'll bet you the last set that evening was better than the first set.
It certainly was. It certainly was. Absolutely. It wasn't until about the second week they found out I could sing, and then I was really in trouble.
Nice.
But I don't know whether you bring any popular music background to it, Risa. I don't know if you've ever been
Not
involved
really.
in that area.
No, but my first professional job was playing viola.
Mm-hmm.
So in viola is sort of a similar,
It's a similar relationship
quirky,
to the...
kind of always need a viola
Yep.
instrument.
That's right.
So yeah, my first professional job was going on tour to Italy and Sicily with a chamber group based in London. And that was really, really exciting. Mm. And I think, first of all, just the excitement of traveling, but then the excitement of traveling and playing this amazing music with wonderful other people. I just... then getting paid. I thought, wow, this is
string player,
great.
you get to go to Italy and play.
Yeah, that was and Sicily was amazing.
Yeah.
The concerts, started usually a half an hour to an hour later than advertised.
Sure.
So that was interesting.
You all needed to find your seats, that sort of thing.
It's just how
Oh,
they
it's
do
called
it in
Italiana.
Sicily.
I see.
Yeah, you're arriving in Sicily,
So-
please set your clocks back 20 years, is the old joke.
Yeah.
That's lovely. I know you had, I knew you had some London connections, and I think you and I at some stage have discovered that we were probably in London at roughly the same time, but
Yeah.
never met.
Yeah.
But which group was it? Who did you go on the road
That was with London Baroque.
To what extent do you bring your early music background? Because I know you're still a prominent performer in the field here in the DC area and elsewhere. To what extent does that inform what you do in the classroom? I've always been curious.
Anytime we do certainly music from the Baroque period, I bring basically everything I know. It's just we perform it as it should be performed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very particular about bowings because they're just, whether you're going down or up bow is really, really important in Baroque music. And so people who just go any which way learn soon that I'm a real stickler. And I think we often, if we're playing Handel or Corelli, we'll listen to period instrument performances of it. I don't make a big deal of it, but those are the performances that I think sound the best. I'll go through the YouTube channel and say, oh no, not that one, not St. Martin in the Fields, nah.
Yes.
Let's listen to Gustav Leonhardt.
Yes. Yeah. Now this is
so-
going to wander off in a direction which is way away from what we're supposed to be talking about, but certainly the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields did wonderful work in their earliest days for making the world aware of this music.
Absolutely.
But they certainly taught an awful lot of people what it shouldn't sound like as well.
Well, I mean, for the time,
the time, it
that
was
was
fabulous.
cutting edge. I
Yeah.
remember growing up,
Yeah,
we always
same
listened to
here.
the radio and St. Martin in the Fields, Iona Brown, St. Martin in the Fields. I loved it. But, it's just the style and knowledge and expertise has just developed incredibly.
Yeah,
since
that's a
then.
downside of the fact that so much music is now recorded and it hangs around. Once upon a time, before recording, if a performance was good, fine, we'd remember it. If it was bad, we didn't have to listen to it over and over again for the next 50 to 75 years.
But it's pretty interesting
Oh, yes.
hearing the different
But
styles of performance.
yes, and of course that trains the kids tremendously,
Yeah.
getting them to perceive, because of their popular music background, and I'm sure you agree with this, Paul. You get a definitive record, and that's the record. If you're going to do Stairway to Heaven, then
We avoid Stairway.
well, yeah, quite. Did that music shop you worked in have the traditional sign, Stairway to Heaven, written on the wall, but with a big circle and a line through it?
We
If you come in
didn't.
and play Stairway to Heaven on the guitar, we'll throw you out?
We didn't. It was silently enforced.
Silently enforced,
Trapdoor.
Yeah. But no, my point being that Stairway to Heaven is perceived, I think, by people as being the recording. The recording is the notation. And
I'd agree with that.
there are not 50 recordings of Stairway to Heaven by equally eminent rock bands of the 70s. Whereas in classical music, you could the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, Consort of Music. You can come up with half a dozen other names that I'm sure that I can't come up with really quickly. And they're all equally valid, but they're all different. And that's a great training thing for students to say, okay, this is good, this is also good. Tell me what's the difference.
What do you like? Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Right. Stairway to Heaven, I don't think you get more than one version unless you go to some live recordings. And
Yeah, well,
then,
yes,
then you
yeah,
get some
that's-
variation, but it's still the same artist that you kind
Absolutely,
of gravitate
yeah,
back towards.
Yes, you're right. And that, of course, is a study in itself. That keeps the fans of the Grateful Dead busy for all of their free time.
Yes, many parents are upset about that.
40,
I'm sure.
40-minute jams on the same tune. And
I think
after
you're right.
another, after another, after another. Do you feel like, do either of you feel like you have a kind of specific point of tradition that you're trying to put across? I mean, that's a leading question for me, because I think that what I'm doing is trying to create a younger generation that will preserve the great symphonic tradition. That's what I'm doing. I am only incidentally responding to questions of theory or any other things that teachers are reckoned to be perhaps doing. If it teaches character, I'm all for it. But I think that the symphonic tradition is the thing that I want most to communicate. I don't know whether the two of you have a similar feeling about some aspect of music, or whether that's just something that is different from...
Well, I feel very strongly that I want my students to sort of make music a part of their lives, in whatever form it takes, and I want them to be able to enjoy music in as many ways as they can, because I've found that they love music, all of them, and that the more they get to know how it works by participating in it, by making music, the more they like it and the more they take it with them. So for me, I'm not worried about the symphonic tradition necessarily, but what I want them to do is to learn how music comes into their lives, how they can listen, how they can hear what's going on in the music and enjoy it. And
yeah, well, that's very congruent with what I do too.
Yeah.
The difference perhaps being that I'm very much aware of which material I'm giving them. That there's no point in playing something written by somebody who is alive now, who writes as if he's been dead for 75 years. If we're going to play the stuff, let's have Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven and Corelli and Vivaldi and Handel and so forth. And that's what I mean by emphasizing or bringing in the tradition. But certainly the way you describe it, that it becomes a part of people's lives because they play it, not because they've listened to a recording of it and written an essay on it, but by the actual act of performance.
But even with really simple music, with my middle schoolers,
yes, I was talking about high school. I'm not ramming Mozart down the throats of 11-year-olds and asking them why they can't do it. If he could write it, why can't you play it? That would be kind of dumb. But no, I'm talking about by the time the kids are older.
Yeah, they definitely respond to high quality music of whatever genre, and especially I think if you take the time to help them hear what's going on, a special chord in the music where it's kind of an event, and so that's one of my favorite things, is just to see how people can learn to hear what's going on in the music,
and always basing it on the stuff that you're actually playing, not in the abstract. A very long time ago, I can't remember even the context, but I remember someone saying in England at some sort of conference, the only music theory that musicians remember is the music theory that they have used. If you give people like vocabulary lists in your French class, how many of those vocabulary lists can you remember when you walk into the French restaurant and the waiter says, incomprehensible? Yeah? And it's the same thing. Give people a load of musical terms, and they will only remember the ones they've actually done.
Right.
Yeah.
And do they need to remember the terms or the concepts? What's more important?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. But certainly for people who work, kids particularly, who have to learn to work through notation.
Sure.
They do need to be able to name the concepts, because they're there in the music, and everybody kind of needs to talk about them. Whereas in essentially unnotated or roughly notated music, it's very much can you hear the concept, never mind what it's called.
Right.
How much notation do you use and what type of notation do you use in instruction?
Not a whole lot. I try and stay clear of that. I think if we were to teach adults over an 8-week period, you know, and we were to start them by learning notation, we wouldn't get too much further than,
Yeah.
you know,
That's right.
learning the staff, right? And,
Sure.
and that's probably where we'd be. So, you know, the root chord is the 1, and I'll tell you about the 4 and the 5, and, you know, and this is how the song is structured. So number notation in that way, and we'll use some tablature as well, is a pretty quick and dirty way to describe what order the notes are played in and where you want to play them. You know, that's,
Well, tablature has a very distinguished tradition. It's been around for a very long time, actually. So, you know, that kind of links up with something. I'm sure you have, within the educational context, I'm sure, sort of heard from education specialists who don't know anything about music about how we have to renew what we do, and we have to learn new concepts of this, and we have to form professional learning communities during which we pool everything that we know, et cetera, et cetera. And I've taken to responding in those situations. Basically, this is a very simple process, which we musicians have been doing for the past 500 or 600 years.
Yeah.
You like that instrument, do you? I know how to play that instrument. Let me show you. And I mean, that's basically what you're saying that you do. You know,
Sure.
You want to play it? Here's how you play it.
yeah, I find that if they're not playing a song in the first week, they're not coming back the second week.
That's
you know?
right.
So,
That's right. Oh, there's a wonderful bass player joke on that. I'm sure you heard about it.
which one?
Oh, which one? Yes. Yeah, all the wonderful bass players. Should we tell bass player jokes? We won't tell viola jokes. Okay. Well, no. This is the one where the kid comes for the lesson for the bass teacher, and the teacher says, "Okay, now look, we're going to get you started here. This is your E string, okay? And you got to play your notes on your E string." The kid, he catches it off, you know, a couple of notes with your first finger and your third finger. That's really great. Okay, so end of lesson, right? Kid comes back the next week. Now we're going to teach you the A string. Okay, right? You got that? Fantastic. Third week, the kid doesn't show up. Teacher calls up and says, "Why didn't you come to your third lesson? You got 2 more strings to learn." He said, "I couldn't. I had a gig."
That's right. There you go. Yes, it's the adage, all the money's in the first 5 frets.
That's right.
That's
That's a good one. Or buy a bass and you can make a living, learn to play it and you can make a fortune. Yeah.
Perhaps, yes, perhaps. You'd asked about sort of the perspectives we have with the music we teach and what's sort of in our minds, and so I'll take a turn at that question myself. I've been fortunate over my career. It's a part-time career, but it's a career nonetheless, with meeting people who have written their own music. And it inspires me to play original music much more than to replicate things by Led Zeppelin or the Grateful Dead, although I've endeavored at those as well. And I find that as a player, what I want to do is to play the most tasteful and appropriate part possible. I can work on my chops and learn to play quickly, and I can learn to slap the bass or something like that, but you know how often that fits in? Not very often. So I take that, I try to honor the music that others have written the best I can, and support them, promote whatever I'm feeling that they're trying to get across. Take that to the bass class, and that's what I try and teach. I try and teach people, you know, the bass has a function, and of course it's my opinion that I'm giving to them as to what I think it is, but you know, we are mostly a support instrument, I think. We can help promote the song, we can help promote and cue the audience, we can deliver the other players in the audience to the next chord or to the chorus or whatever, but unless we are talking about bass virtuosos, which I don't think they are in the first 8 weeks, then I think we start as support players. And so I guess that's sort of my perspective as I'm approaching it myself and teaching it to others.
And that's very, very similar to one view that we might take in both in historic music and contemporary composed music, and that is that instruments have roles.
Absolutely.
There's also a streak of educational music which operates almost on the opposite theory, where if within your 32 bar piece that you're writing for the grade 1 or 2 players, if the basses don't have the melody, the violas don't have the melody, the cellos don't have the melody, and the second violins don't have the melody, you've somehow let the side down. And I find that very constricting, because eventually you arrive at a point where the viola player and the bass player have to discover that life sometimes consists of boom, boom, while somebody else does something. And that kind of cuts across modern educational philosophy a bit, where we must all have our starring role and think big ideas.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you've
I haven't lately. I must be choosing music that doesn't really do that.
well, but knowing you, I'm sure you would. It's some of the folks who feel that that's the fundamental thing they must do, is to
Yeah.
give everyone an equal opportunity, no
yeah.
matter how the musical effect.
Yeah.
I'm sure you choose music which, first of all, starts out as music.
I think so. Sometimes it's pretty simple, but we started. I always think it's so amazing to see where the kids start and where they end up at the end of the year. I don't really. I tend to make it a little hard for the ones who are less advanced, just because we're such a small school and we have the total kind of spectrum from very beginner to quite advanced. So I have to figure out a way to make it interesting for the advanced players, because and so sometimes the less advanced ones, especially at the start of the year, feel a little bit at sea. So I just try to keep encouraging them, and I find that the other students are incredibly supportive of each other, because we do have this big range, and somehow they realize, it's not going to be all at the same level, and they're very supportive of each other. And the best violinist can be incredibly supportive of the least advanced one, and that's something I find incredibly inspiring, just because I think being part of music, it's more than just creating sound or recreating the music that was written down. It's also a really social activity, and sometimes with people you wouldn't necessarily socialize with, just in regular life, but you have a role to play, and people learn about each other. They learn about those people who are really different from them, and yet they have a common project to work on together, to put together, and I find that very, very interesting.
We do find in some school situations, and particularly in some extracurricular musical situations, a tendency to ghettoize the best players and not let them be there for everybody else.
Yeah.
We should make sure that the best player understands that unless they want to stand all alone on a stage with no one else accompanying them, and some of them do want to do that, but unless that's all they ever want to do, they need to find their role as leaders of the group.